Thank you for tuning into Stampscaping 101. This is the third scene in a series of who knows how many there'll be of different variations on the same composition, okay? We've worked through a couple of different looks for this lakeside cove scenario here. And in this one right here, I've done one of the things that I really enjoy doing, which is kind of a Northern Lights, Aurora Borealis type of background, I guess, color scheme, and just stamped right over it using those same images from the previous composition, and it gives it a kind of a dramatic look. You know, it's very bold, I would say, and I don't know, deep in terms of my color scheme. It just depends on how much color you lay down on your background, you know, and that will relate to just how deeply saturated the end result will look, okay? Now, I used a lot of Marvy inks on this one, which I've been kind of sticking to the Mementos and the Distress inks in the previous two videos, but in this one right here, Marvy inks really are much brighter than most other lines of inks, okay? And in the video I suggested, you know, maybe you don't have to hook up with, you know, they don't sell these color-coded pads anymore, but they have blank pads, but they have 40 different colors of re-inkers, okay? You don't need the pads, okay? The pad is convenient in terms of a vehicle for the ink, you know, if you just want to do a quick thing and tap into it, but these re-inkers cost the same amount as a pad, and you can just use a palette or something like that. Put a few drops down there. Use whatever sponge applicators you're using to apply your inks down, and so you can get a much kind of brighter looking, you know, kind of end result in whatever color scheme you're working with. I would say if you had about, I don't know, 7 re-inkers or something like that to supplement your other lines of inks. Not that you have to, but, you know, in here it really does add to that kind of that much more intense glowing look, you know, having like this light green right here from Marvy, alright? Anyways, that being said, mix and match what you have. You can even use pens if you want to, and you just kind of roll that onto your sponge applicator and apply it that way. But a fun way to work, pretty quick and easy, you know, in terms of that. You know, the one thing that takes the most amount of time is laying down those colors right there, but it doesn't take too long. And you can be, things don't have to be perfect, you know. The thing about it, you know, as I mentioned in the video, is just try to remember to retain some light areas if you're going for this Aurora Borealis, and that's what gives it that kind of curtain look to it. Which means that when you get into your darker tones, you know, I used dark blue, dark greens, and even black, you know, coming into here. It just means you don't obscure, don't cover up all those light areas that you've retained throughout your lighter tones, okay? So just use a little bit of restraint and apply color kind of in a slower kind of methodology when you get down, you know, to those last values of whatever hue you're working with. It doesn't have to be greens either. You can do it in, you know, sunsetty colors. You know, I've seen Aurora Borealises and reds and purples and all kinds of colors, and they're all kind of equally dramatic, or you can just come up with a color scheme on your own. But look up Northern Lights on, you know, some kind of search engine and click on images, and you'll see just a wide variety of different color schemes to work with, and different types of looks. Sometimes there's Northern Lights that look like curtains, some of them look like rays where they're flaring out, and all kinds of different looks, and they're all kind of equally dramatic and really interesting in terms of all the color schemes that really do exist out there when they're apparent, and I've never seen one live, but until then, I can kind of think about it and stamp it, or at least my versions of them. So, anyways, a good, you know, scene to do a stamp along with, if you choose to do that. And if you choose to watch the video or do a stamp along with me, I hope you enjoy it. Okay, third scene in a series. Same composition though, but let's work this one a little bit differently. we have these two initial compositions right here, where I have stamped the imagery first and then applied the ink right over it. That's good for a couple different reasons. If you stamp the scene first, then let's say if I want to retain some lightness in some very specific areas, like on these rocks or a particular rock, then I could leave it light, or the white of the paper. But if I do a background first, such as a brayered background or something like that, all of the tones and the gradations of color that you might have in the background for something like that, they're already set. I can't necessarily go back in, you know, aside from some sort of bleaching technique or something like that, which I really don't do. You can't really bring out the you know, the light areas again. So that's why you would stamp out the composition first and then color in afterwards. But there is another way to do these things. Like I said, some people like to brayer backgrounds and then just stamp right over them in kind of a silhouette style of stamping, you know, with it works better with kind of bolder images that have a lot of solid area. But that being said, let's get to this one here. I'm going for one of the scenes that I really love doing and the type of background that I like to do, which is a Northern Lights, Aurora Borealis type of look, okay? And I have done this in previous videos before. In this color scheme, it'll be a little bit of a different composition right now because we're sticking to this arrangement of the designs here. But here we go. I'll have this, I usually do it on a vertical so I can have more of these kind of, they call it the curtain style of a Aurora Borealis with, you know, these long kind of beams of, you know, colored light reaching into the sky, kind of in a curtain-y looking format here. But anyway, these are really fun to do, and it's a really good exercise in the retention of light and defining of light through the use of color, okay? So you can see this where I'm kind of adding this in, but you can see where I'm leaving these, what looks like streaks of light, okay? That's just because I'm not going over that area with my ink, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this around this way and come into it from the bottom. We are doing this lakeside scene, so what we'll have is, hopefully, it will look like we have these curtains of light in the sky, and then we have them reflected in the water, and reflections really make for a nice dramatic type of lakeside or body of water scene. Okay. So you can see this right here. I mean, how many of these you have, you know, these little beams of light or whatnot. It's not really a beam of light, it's just, I don't know what it is. I think it's, what is it? It's particles of these, I'm trying to think of what the exact cause of the light beam. It was solar flares, but I thought it was I forgot the terminology, but it's these suspended chemicals or whatnot in the air from, I thought it was from solar flares or something like that, that when it gets into our atmosphere or something like that, or not electrocuted, I don't know, look it up. I don't remember. I just stamp it, I don't do it. I don't lecture on it. I know I did it one time, but it, I don't know, it looks like it's one of those types of things that my brain didn't feel the need to remember. Okay, here's what we're doing here now. I'm roughly adding this, okay, that was, what one did I just use? Was it Pear Tart right there? I'm going into the Distress Ink peeled paint. Okay, it's just, I'm picked out basically a range, a value range of greens, okay? And as you can see, I'm mixing and matching. I have some Memento, I have some Distress here, Ranger. And one of the things I do want to do is I do want to use some of my Marvy green, All right. For me, I really like the Marvy ink intensities. They did stop selling their pad format of colors, but they still have re-inkers of all the colors that they used to have in pad form. So, and then they do sell blank pads as well. So, I don't know. It might be something that you want to think about if you really like this look of dye-based inks layered onto glossy cardstock. The Marvy inks, okay, are really, really bright in terms of intensity. So even if you have a lot of different colors, you might supplement with, I don't know, it would just take a handful of the Marvy ones. Let's say having a light green, a blue of some sort, maybe an orange, kind of something in the different families of colors. Pink would be great. Okay, if you add a really bright Marvy pink to, let's say, you know, oranges from a different line of inks, or if you add this to the purples, it'll make those seem much brighter, okay? Because the brightest colors within your range of values in a given composition or color scheme, whatever you're doing, it will brighten up all the colors, okay? Because dye-based inks are transparent, so all of the colors that you use, you know, even though, like, I'm using Cottage Ivy right now, this is a darker green, right? But this is what this dark green looks like on a, you know, just on white paper. But when you layer it over, you know, all of these other colors, it does have a different look to it, and it's much richer, and there's more depth to it. And it's because these are transparent colors that we're working with, so anything that you lay down, and if you cover it up, it's not just like a lost, you know, color that's underneath it. You're always getting the influence of all of your colors that you use. That's why I like to use quite a few colors, at least in this type of look right here. I think it looks much deeper and richer as a result, okay? But anyways, going back to the Marvies here, I've laid down what? This is my fourth color, okay? And I think that looks pretty good, but let me show you what it looks like with a Marvy color. And going back to the Marvies, you don't necessarily need to have, you know, the pad form. You don't have to buy, you know, the blank pad for the re-inker, because a lot of times I don't really ink up stamps, like say in this color right here. I happen to have all the pads, but I'm rarely doing, you know, like a green cloud or something. I don't know, something like that. But I do use the ink out of it, so it's very convenient for me just to tap in here and go, right? But if I just put a couple drops of this re-inker fluid, they come in little bottles like this. If I just put a couple drops of re-inker fluid into, you know, a little palette or something, I can use the ink that way. So you just grab, you know, a little palette and put a couple drops in there, and you're ready to go, okay? So, you know, like I said, about, I don't know, what did I say? 7 colors, 6, 7 colors, you know, would probably do it, you know, in terms of that. But here, let me do this on one side, and I'll show you what I mean about the intensity of Marvy, okay? Alright, so can you see the difference here between this side and this side? It's more intense, isn't it? The vibrancy of that color. And this color, when I talk about the vibrancy, I'm talking about the, you know, the relative intensity of it. Okay, not the relative value of it, which is dark to light, but I'm talking about dull to bright, okay? And bright doesn't necessarily mean light. There's very bright blues and there's very dull light blues, okay? But anyways, these Marvy tones can really brighten things up. You know, a couple greens would be good, and scenic stamping blues. You know, greens and blues tend to be very popular types of earth tones, a brown or two maybe. back before raised eye-base pads, in general, of any sort, we used to use all Marvy pens with rubber stamps. So that's going back a long ways when we're talking about, you know, there were no dye-base pads out there, and there were no raised dye-base pads. They hadn't invented a raised dye-base pad yet. The ink would, you know, run out of the pad if you had it, you know, a pad that was raised up. So, oops, I had some ink on the bottom of this, so I have it in there. Anyways, that area's getting covered up anyway. See how that just kind of comes out. Okay, this pad right here is starting to degrade on me. This pad's probably 25 years old now at this point in time. Alright, this is a dark green. See how it's really quite dark? Okay, if I really tap it down like that. But there is a pretty decent amount of ink on this. Now, it's not all wet to the touch. It's not all sloppy wet, okay? But the pad, or the pulp of the paper, is getting a little bit soaked. So if you want to get it a little bit dark, you kind of have to tap some off like so. Okay. But it does give you time to blend it out. Okay. I need to blend that one in. That one kind of did soak in quite a bit when I just, you know, went like that in that corner there. I was surprised. One thing about dye-based inks too, Marvy inks, they're thinner, okay, than any other ink that I know. So if I am adding more ink to an area that's already been, you know, heavily applied with inks, sometimes if you're using just all thick inks, it's hard to apply that next color. Even the Marvy one that's thin and should penetrate the paper and previous inks, you can see if I just go like that, it, you know, it really just wipes off pretty fast. So if you're working with an ink that's, you know, the viscosity is that it's much thicker than, you really have to kind of leave it on there a little bit and let it set up before you kind of streak it. Otherwise, you're kind of wiping it off the page. Okay. Anyways, can you kind of see where I'm getting at? You know, right here with these little curtains, you know, these little kind of streams of, you know, light beams. Let me use the side of this. I'm using the side of this right now, like so. Okay. And getting into the middle here. The trick is you know, you just have to kind of have a conscious awareness of this part of it. If you want to keep that light in there, just don't color it all in with your, especially with your darker tones, okay? Well, you know, at this point in time, I don't want to get to this one and I just go all over it and, oh my gosh, I can't see any of my light anymore, okay? So just kind of, you know, I start using the edge of my applicator, whatever you might use. Here's a makeup sponge. Let me try it with that here. Let me see if I can show it to you for those that might be using something like this or don't have a, you know, a applicator. It's a little bit different, but I can kind of, you know, I can kind of make do. I can use the edge of it like so. Actually, that's working pretty good. That's a good, this is starting to get a little crumbly too for some reason. These are really old too. Okay. Oh, I think I know. I think it's that pad that's catching crumbs on this. All right. This one worked pretty good. Having that sharper edge kind of gives it a little bit more of that jagged, you know, little look that actually looks pretty nice and is conducive to this overall look that I'm going after. Alright, so you see what I'm doing. I'm building it up from light greens and I'm working into darker greens. Let's try, this is just called green. It's the number 4 basic Marvy green. Looks pretty good. Looks like a little bit of a change. I think this pad is juicier than that pine green that I was just using. But you can see how bright these Marvy colors are. See how that is? Sometimes it's almost too bright. You don't want it looking like a, you know, like a fluorescent green sometimes in like grasses or something like that. That's why I like to use some browns or something like that sometimes to kind of mellow things out, because Marvy colors are super bright and sometimes it could look a little bit too intense. Okay, now here's what I like to do too, okay? I have this now, but I'm going to go all the way to, oops, I thought this was black. I didn't remember I had a bottle green here, or did I already use this one? Yeah, I don't think I used it. Use whatever greens you have, you know, and line them up. Pick out your different brands and just go light green, dark green, okay? Now if you start applying, and just use them in sequence, okay? Use them going from light to dark. Now, the most amount of coverage you're going to do is those lighter colors, okay? When you get down, you see, I mean, that was the bottle green. That was like, I don't know, 30 seconds or something like that. You just don't think that, you know, when you're applying your first color and you're getting a full amount of coverage with it, that it's going to take forever to do it, because you just don't use these darker tones as much. Now, here's a dark blue. Now, that's not green, but sometimes I can achieve a darker looking green or a darker looking area just by applying a different color. In the early days, sometimes that Marvy black, you know, when I said I used to use all those pens there to do our scenes with, sometimes I didn't like that Marvy black, so my combination, someone reminded me of this at a convention about a year ago. They said, yeah, you used to use these two colors, and I was thinking, what? And then I thought, oh, you're right, we used to use violet right here and bottle green, and we would mix those on an image because it gave us a much darker, richer looking tone than black back then. Marvy black now is really good. I don't know if they changed the formula or what, but anyway, here's a Prussian blue. See, I want to get a little bit darker. This is supposed to be a nighttime sky, right? So I'm going to use it fairly sparingly. It's kind of in the corners right here, but see, this Prussian blue really gets fairly dark. Now, if you don't have Prussian blue, and a lot of you won't, go ahead and use black, okay? But no, here's what I'm doing too. I'm going like this, okay? And if I want that to be thicker, then I'm just going to build it out like this. Okay, so you see this tapered edge? I'm not going like this, okay? Then you're going to get something like that. So use the edge of something. If it's something like a cosmetic sponge, okay? I can just kind of build that up like this. See this right here? And see, I kind of get that tapered edge like that, because I'm kind of lifting as I'm going. Squeeze, contact and lift, contact and lift. Alright, so it's like, yeah, there we go. And then it gives you that nice kind of, it gives you this kind of flame look, okay? I'm coming into it from this side, but when I don't, you know, streak, it leaves a little bit of a, kind of this flame type of look reaching up, and that's what those kind of Aurora Borealis types of formations kind of look like. Okay, so leaving it a little bit streakier in this case is good, and you get that type of thing. It looks like it's these little arms of light reaching up into the sky. Okay. It makes for a pretty, you know, dramatic looking scene, you know, having this type of thing. First of all, we just don't see this every day. And if you don't live in a certain area of the world, you probably won't see these things at all. I've never seen one live. So, but I think most people have seen them in a photograph or something of that sort. And I don't know, it's a natural occurrence, so it is kind of cool, but this is black, by the way. Yeah, believe it or not, this kind of this background here, and it doesn't matter if you get things like really smooth or not, but when you stamp those images right over the top of that, it really has a really kind of a nice dramatic impact, and it's kind of like, you know, when you pick up your stamp, which we'll do in a minute here, there's kind of this moment of a reveal, you know, and that was always kind of fun, watching people kind of pulling their image off of their scenes when they were doing something like this in these workshops back in the day. Okay, now this is black, right? And I'm putting quite a bit on the four corners of my card to create a nice strong vignette type of look. But look how rich that area is in there, okay? And you can see all those other tones underneath. It's like layering down these transparent layers of color, you know. And then at the end it looks like light kind of emanating from within the card itself, and that's what I like to kind of create. So, and you create that by when you get into the darker tones, you don't take those in, you don't streak them in quite as far as you did with some of the previous tones. Mostly when you get down to the darkest tones, you kind of stay a little bit more perimeter oriented, and if you do come in there like that, okay, you're doing it with kind of a drier, see there's a black on this right here, but you know, when I'm doing this, it's very dry on here, so that's like a 10% gray or something like that. And that's when that's coming into these areas, okay? So I don't get this big, huge, really super strong black streak of black right in here, okay? It's, if I do come in here, it's a very light shade of this color, okay? And that's where things happen nice and incrementally and gradually, okay? So it's not like you have to kind of have this, you know, this, you know, streak and you're just kind of, you know, hoping that everything turns out right. Everything kind of comes into focus, you know, like on a, imagine, you know, some kind of dial or something like that, and it's going from step, you know, 1 to 1,000 or something like that, you know. I guess these are like, I don't know how many strokes I've applied of color on here, but it's just one little stroke at a time, and, you know, we're not jumping from, you know, stroke 3 to step, you know, stroke 30, you know, in one fell swoop or something like that. That's why these kind of backgrounds come about fairly slowly. And if you notice here, here's this, what's going on right here, okay? You see how these striations in the sky are kind of going this way, right? Well, it's because I've just done the exact same process, but I've taken it and I've streaked it across this way, which is horizontal in this format. But if you can see the streaks in there, those are the exact types of things that I'm doing on this, but I'm just using a different color scheme, and this one will end up being kind of vertical as opposed to horizontal across here, okay? And of course I've used different colors, but it's the exact same process right there. Alright, that being said, I do have a few little crumbs of, I don't know, sponge or pad or something like that. I didn't think these ones got really crumbly. It looks a little crumbly though. One of the things about these things, they're very inexpensive. I don't know, gigantic pack. Are those at the 99-cent store type things? They might be, I'm not sure. Okay, let's go on with some black ink, okay? We're going to, I want these images to be fairly strong, so I'm going to re-ink my black pad a little bit, alright? And I can have this fairly juicy. I don't like to re-ink my pad and then ink it up on here and stamp it out and then just do coloring right away, because it's, you know, this is going to be too wet on here because of the freshly re-inked pad aspect of it. Now I do have some light beams and they're going to be reflected down here in the water, so one of the things I did just now is I inked up this portion of it, but I didn't ink up all this tone down here in the water, okay? I just kind of left that as is. I mean, if I get some of that tone in there, it's okay, but I just didn't ink up that entire tonal area of the water surface, okay, which are all these little dots down here, so just kind of ink up right around in there. Alright, now let's see. I think I have that roughly about, oh, which way's up and which way's down? That's the question here. This is a little bit different, you know, from side to side. I think I'm going to go with this one. I think these little light things reach down here a little bit farther, so doing these lessons like this whole idea of doing the same composition, I really have to get that, you know, the composition similar. If I'm off like a ½ inch one way or another, it's not going to matter though. But we'll keep these imagery, the composition's basically the same. Okay, I'm keeping that down for a little bit of time, and while I'm doing that, why don't I just start inking up the Pines and Rocks image. Okay. Now, I don't know if I have to keep that down for that long, but there is a lot of ink on here, and one of the things you don't want to do is ink up your stamp on this freshly, you know, saturated, toned background. Stamp it down, pull it up in 2 seconds, and suddenly it's like a vacuum, and it took off all the ink, and none of the ink transferred, okay? And there you go. That one transferred just fine, but I made sure of it. That was a little bit of time on there. Let's go with the Pines and Rocks here, and we're going to overlap. I'll probably overlap this about a ½ inch into it, and about a ½ inch over this one, okay? So there's plenty of leeway, okay? You can do it 1/4 to a ½ inch or so, so that's why you don't have to. You don't want to overlap at 3 inches or something like that, but if you can just kind of see it there, you don't have to have it perfect, and there's plenty of, you know, variation here. There's a wide tolerance, okay, in terms of overlaps go, you know, when you use these stamps. That's the way I designed them. You know, so you don't have to be dead on with anything. And as a matter of fact, if you go over a little bit too much, that works just fine because everything is nice and seamless and it merges together well. Where it doesn't, you know, where you have to kind of fill in is when someone's trying to be too careful and they're trying to go edge to edge. They see scenic stamping like, is it like a puzzle, you know, where I don't want to do any overlapping? And then they stamp it out and they have this big gap in between, which you can kind of fill in with tone or different images, you know, but, you know, you just assume not have to do that if you know, if possible, okay? All right, so there's that overlap in there, and hopefully you can't tell where one image ends and the other begins because there's sufficient overlap happening there. And you can see where that kind of dramatic lighting in there really comes out. I don't know, just that, nice and dramatic and hopefully interesting. This imagery right here is very, you know, solid and kind of silhouette in nature, just like this oak branch is solid. You know, there's not a lot of open area in there. You know, I'm talking about as far as the image goes, it's not an outline of a branch. Okay, it's a solid branch. Okay. We're covering up some of those beams in here, right? Some of our nice background, but does that look bad? I don't think it does because my foreground imagery, I've designed it to be fairly airy, so if you like what's going on in the background, what you do is if you put something over the front of it like this, hopefully it doesn't obscure what you have going in the background, but enhances it through the use of contrast, okay? So you can see those branches kind of hanging around up there, but you know, you can see through them, you know, that those beams of light, and I think it actually enhances that object. You know, you're enhancing kind of both areas. You're making the aurora borealis and these beams of light seem much lighter because you have something darker right next to it. Sometimes it's, you know, having something hard next to something that looks relatively soft in the background can be nice. Okay, let's go with these reeds right here. I'm trying to decide if I want to put any of those ripples down there. I don't know if I do. Maybe we'll keep the ripples out of it because I'm thinking about this lake down here as being kind of like a perfect mirror for the sky up there. Okay. Speaking about a nice airy type of foreground image, reeds large, fits the bill. It puts you as a viewer, or me as a viewer too, looking into this scene, right up next to something really close. So it kind of puts us right in the scene, having something really close next to you, in addition to things of distance. Okay. All right, now one of the things I'm going to do at the end of what I didn't mention, this, you know, the previous two videos was I'm going to come into these and add some additional tones, you know, into these scenes after all's said and done, because I just thought about doing that last night after I finished these. But I'll go in and add some embellishments like the white gel pen and pigment ink and whatnot. But we'll just keep these kind of these basic looks fairly simple. But so far, 3 scenes and 3 different kind of personalities of the same composition, you know. Different looks, you know. Here's the first one. Twilight-ish, or I don't know, pre-sunrise or sunset. Kind of high noon type of tonations to that, and kind of a more dramatic look in here. I need a little bit of tone on these rocks in here, but that's what I'll do in a future video. But here's a different look. Some little white gel pen stars up there will look really dramatic as well. But that's a different way to do it. You know, you add in some tones in the background and you kind of just really, you know, you saturate it, and then you just kind of do what I call silhouetting, just stamping out fairly bold images, solid images over the top of it in black ink. And it's a pretty simple way to work, but can be very, very dramatic in terms of the end results. Alright, so hope you enjoyed that 3rd installment of Media and Mood. There's a lot of other things we can do. I was thinking about a sunset maybe next or something like that. And I don't know. We'll see what we get when we get to it. Okay? Alright. Thanks for watching.